Hi, everyone, and welcome to a virtual evening presentation presented by the Museum of Natural and Cultural History. My name is Lauren, and I'd like to start this evening by recognizing that the museum and the University of Oregon are located on Kalapuya Ilahi, the traditional indigenous homeland of the Kalapuya people, many of whom are now citizens of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde and the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians. We recognize and honor all Indigenous peoples who continue to call the Willamette Valley home. We have a full program for you this evening, so we're going to go ahead and jump right in. We will have time for questions at the end of the workshop, so please feel free to type your questions into either the chat or the Q&A on Zoom, and we'll get to as many as we can. A quick note for those of you who are local, the museum has reopened for visitors. We have new hours and a timed ticketing system to ensure a safe and enjoyable visit for every guest. Reservations are highly recommended, but we may be able to accommodate walk-up visitors. Visit our website, that's mnch.uoregon.edu, to learn more and to reserve your tickets. All right. So I am joined this evening by two very special guests. We have Ray Troll and Edward Davis. Dr. Edward Davis is an associate professor of earth sciences at the University of Oregon, as well as the paleontological collections manager for the Museum of Natural and Cultural History's Condon Fossil Collection. Ray Troll, who I'm sure for many of you needs no introduction, is an artist based out of Ketchikan, Alaska. His unique blend of science and art has evolved into several traveling exhibits, including the buzzsaw sharks of long ago, which our museum hosted a few years back, as well as Cruisin' the Fossil Coastline, which opens at the Oregon Coast Aquarium on June 11th. Welcome to you both, and with that, we'll go ahead and get started.
Thanks, Lauren.
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. And I want to put an additional plug in. I actually today sent about a half a dozen or more fossils from our museum off to be part of that Cruising the Fossil Coastline exhibit. So there's some real treasures from behind the scenes that don't get to see the light of the day very much that fit perfect into Ray's concept for that exhibit. So it'd be worth going to see those too. I'm looking forward to seeing it. Now, I'm going to present really quickly a nutshell version of the history of the giant saber-toothed salmon. And I don't want to take up too much time because we want to spend most of the time with Ray and his work. But if you don't know, we're going to talk a little bit about the saber-toothed salmon, or what we used to call the saber-toothed salmon, which has a scientific name, Oncorhynchus rastrosus. And this is a talk actually put together mostly by the work of my colleague Karen Cleason, who's at the Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine. She's a paleontologist who focuses on fish. And then Brian Sidlauskas is a colleague of mine at Oregon State University. He's a modern biologist who also focuses on fish. And then Sabrina Prescott is a modern fish biologist from Dalhousie University in Canada. So I always like to say in these talks, everything that I get right is because of those three, and any mistakes that I make is because of me. Because I'm not actually a fish paleontologist or fish biologist. I focus on fossil mammals, things like three-toed horses and giant camels. So give me a break, okay? This is the line drawing that was originally published of the giant saber-toothed salmon back in 1972, the type specimen. The first skull that was published was drawn this way in the paper, and when Kavner and Miller drew it, they took this bone, which has the saber-tooth on it, and it was found separate, but they clicked it on and published the paper with it attached like this. And then, you know, they were good scientists. Buried in the text of the paper was a note that it was not actually attached, and this was a hypothesis for how it fit together. But it made a lot of sense because teeth point down in your mouth. And so that's sort of the simplest sort of Occam's razor way to approach to finding loose teeth. And they named it Smilodon ichthyes after Smilodon the cat, because it had these teeth that looked a lot like the teeth of Smilodon the cat. And then rastrosus is actually named for the rough gill rakers it has. So in its gills, it has these tiny little hooks that it would have used for filter feeding when it was alive. And we see other modern salmon still do that today and have that feature, but this one has way more of them than modern salmon do. So we think it was probably a filter feeder when it was alive in the Miocene. Now, in 1993, some friends of mine, Stearley and Smith, published a paper that showed that this saber-toothed salmon actually falls inside the evolutionary tree of these two living species of salmon, which are both in the genus Oncorhynchus. And so because of the rules of scientific names, that Smilodonyctes name had to get moved down and get what we call the parentheses of shame. And so the modern name for this fish is Oncorhynchus rastrosus. And you know, the giant salmon really would have been giant. This is a picture that Ray made a while ago, kind of illustrating how big it would have been if there had been a human alive to try to catch it at the time, just to give you some context for how big this animal would have been. So this is the original specimen, that skull. That's in our museum at UO, and we can't put it on display because it's too delicate. It has to be in controlled conditions to keep it from being damaged by light and by vibrations. But we have more skulls we are going to put on display, and I'll tell you more about those in a minute. But you can see that not only did they show how the teeth were attached in a way that they weren't in the original specimen, actually the skull is in two big pieces, and when they drew it, they reconstructed it as though it was all one piece together. So there was a lot of artistic license in that paper. We don't mind artistic license, but it's really important to let us know when you're doing it, and it wasn't entirely clear in the publication. So that skull was collected back actually earlier than the 70s, but this is a picture from the 72 paper where they published it. The collecting actually happened in the 60s at a site in Central Oregon, what Shotwell called the torrential beds from near the town of Gateway in Oregon in Jefferson County. So that's where the star is. And the reason why they call them the torrential beds is because they are a bunch of unsorted gravel, which look like they were probably a big landslide. And we agree with Kavanagh and Miller that probably what happened was these animals were spawning or had spawned in a big quiet pool, and then a big landslide or series of landslides came in and buried them quickly. And as a consequence of the quick burial, we get complete preservation of the skulls and skeletons of these animals. So that original Kavanagh and Miller paper, they only found a skull, and that's what they published. But several more animals have been found there over time with more parts of them. In 2014, I went there with a group of students from the University of Oregon to collect more skulls from the site. And those skulls were brought to our attention, I want to say, by this group called NARG. That's a group of amateur paleontologists that works, they meet at the Rice Museum up near Portland once a month. And NARG has got a code of conduct that says that if they find anything of scientific importance, they have to make sure that it ends up in a museum. And they did that with the specimen, and I really appreciate the work that they do. So we collected more skulls in 2014, and lo and behold, they did not have saber teeth. They had sideways teeth, okay? And that was a big surprise. I have a volunteer, Pat Ward, who's a retired teacher who comes in and does prep work for me. And like the first day, the first project they put him on was cleaning this guy up. We couldn't see the teeth at all when it came in from the field. And he came running up to my office that first day and was like, "Oh my God, the teeth are on the side." And so this is a picture of one of the two skulls that we got at that 2014 excavation, and some modern salmon in a picture for comparison, so you can kind of see its face here. And the teeth, they really do stick out to the side. And if we only found one of them, I would think it was weird or that it had been crushed by the fossilization process. But we actually found two, and the skulls are perpendicular to each other. So I'm confident that it wasn't some kind of crushing action from the fossilization process. So these are the two skulls pulled out and put in the same orientation. And you can see we've got one that's more complete and has, it's missing the tooth, but has the socket for the tooth here. And it has the tooth on the other side. And then this one is the one that you could see face on just a second ago that has the teeth on the side. Those are the two new skulls that we got from the 2014 excavation. And this is a CT scan of that one that has the complete teeth. And what Karen Cleason has done is colored the different premaxillae. And one of the things she was able to see from the CT scan is that they're not actually articulated. So they're held, they would have been held to the rest of the skull by soft tissue when it was alive. So if it had decomposed any at all before burial, they would have popped off and been loose, which is why that other skull had them not connected. So what I want to point out here is that Ray actually knew about the sideways teeth back in the day, because there had been other skulls and skeletons of these giant salmon that came out of that site. but they were collected by people who didn't get them into the scientific domain. They didn't come to museums, they stayed in private collections. And so there was information kicking around that these had sideways teeth, but the scientists couldn't touch it because we have to have it in a museum where we can be sure that generations from now, other scientists will be able to see and touch and learn from those same specimens. So specimens that are held in private collections like those aren't actually real as far as science is concerned. And it wasn't until that 2014 specimen was collected we were able to do it. But Ray had heard some information about it, so he made this illustration that has some of the salmon with the down teeth and some of the salmon with the side teeth.
Yeah.
To illustrate. And if you want to, in your time, you can talk a little bit more about the thought process there. But so in the end, when we look at this giant salmon, it's really less like the Smilodon and more like a boar. And it's also a lot like a basking shark or a whale shark, where it's filter feeding with its gills. And that's what I got to say. I think there is a specimen that inspired that sideways tooth illustration of Ray's has actually come into the museum, again by NARG, that group out of Portland. They pooled their money and purchased it when that specimen came up for sale on eBay, and then donated it to the museum. And that specimen is actually also going to be on display at the Oregon Coast Aquarium as part of the Cruising the Fossil Coastline exhibit. It's been available for viewing at OMSI in Portland. Now it's going to be out there on the Oregon Coast Aquarium, and we are going to eventually build an exhibit case for it in Eugene, but we haven't had a chance to do that, and the pandemic has put a lot of our plans aside. So a lot of people helped. Thanks for your time. I'm going to now pass it over to Ray.
All right, cool. Thanks, Ed. Wow, that's a really good telling of the tale and what a tale it's been, so to speak. You know, all those years. Yeah, I had that sort of cross information. I guess what I need to do now is to share my screen, and I think that our magical behind the scenes folks will help out with that. And I will start my presentation. Are we on? Does that look good? You see it? Okay. So anyways, I'm going to get to, we're going to draw a spike. I'm calling them a spike-tooth salmon now because I think that sounds kind of cool. In fact, I like to call them the giant spike-tooth salmon. But what we're going to do tonight is draw on black paper. And this is the technique that I've been kind of dabbling in for the last 30, 40 years now. And I discovered it one time. I just started doing it, like I said, maybe in the early 80s, late 70s. But this is there's a couple different kinds of material I use when I draw on these dark papers, usually a black paper. This is a color pencil drawing of Cretaceous discoveries from the Northwest coast, up in Vancouver Island and in Washington State, and color pencil on black paper. And this is also color pencil and Neocolor crayon, which is what we're going to be using tonight, is Neocolor crayon. Some more Cretaceous aged ammonites, heteromorph ammonites, and your regular old ammonites, spiral ammonites. But what I want to show you here, this is a drawing of modern day deep sea anglerfish, but drawn with just a white crayon, basically white crayon. And I'm thinking about a light source kind of coming from above and a light source kind of glowing from below. But this is, you can see, as the main thing that when you're drawing on black paper is you're drawing in reverse. In other words, you're drawing the light and not the shadows. So this is the same thing. Deep sea anglerfish, nature's way of stating the obvious. There's a parasitic male reaching for the remote and watching TV and drinking beer. It's color pencil on black paper, color pencil on black paper. This is also color pencil. This is Prismacolor pencil to be exact, on black paper. And you can see the texture of the paper kind of showing through. If you've ever seen my book, Sharkabet, everything in that book was done with Neocolor crayons and with Prismacolor crayons. And this is a gigantic drawing. This is 5 feet by about 13 feet. And on black paper, a big roll of black paper done with Neocolor crayons and a little bit of oil pastel. Color pencil once again. This is all colored pencil. It's very similar. The reason I use the Prismacolor pencils, they're heavily pigmented. Here's my beloved ratfish, male and the female. I've also tried this technique drawing on black pieces of mat board and some archival pieces of mat board so that there's a real nice texture. So that's the Neocolor crayon on mat board. Here's letter C in the Sharkabet book. Here's letter N for nurse shark. Actually, that last one was a cookie cutter shark. There's nurse sharks. There's a weird prehistoric shark, Paleozoic shark called Ornithoprion, letter O. This is done entirely with the Neocolor crayons. This is color pencil. I use color pencil when I want really detailed stuff, but when I'm working faster and bigger. This is all Neocolor crayons. It's actually 2 pieces of paper. Then I photoshopped the 2 pieces of paper together, the seam. The D is for dogfish. So you can see there's a moonlit scene there. When you draw on black paper, it's pretty natural to start thinking about moonshine and drawing night scenes. Here's a drawing of stingrays, but actually notice that the background I stenciled out, drew the stingrays first. These are river rays. And then I stenciled them out. I covered them with wax paper, a little bit of spray glue, and then cut around them and left them covered up and then spray painted it in the background. The same thing here, did this with these yellow-nosed, shovel-nosed guitar fish. And the background is also just a Neocolor crayon and color pencil, and then the background has been spray painted. Color pencil, color pencil. And you can see this kind of glowing light that's going on. I'll talk, this sort of underglow that's happening here. I'll talk a little bit about that. Moonfish, rockfish, sunfish, flounders. And this is where I really got 2 different light sources, one coming up from above, and this is done with actually chalk pastel, real similar, but on really textured paper. It's actually a deep blue paper, but there's blue cold light coming from above and orange light coming from below. I sort of imagine this as sort of a dawn setting, you know, the basically moonlight above and the sun coming up below. So it's kind of a cool thing where you have 2 different light sources. This is a Devonian scene, kind of blurring the lines between fish and the early tetrapods. Same kind of thing here with Cambrian animals from the Cambrian explosion. This is chalk pastel, but it's very similar to the Neocolor. A blue light source above and a hot pink light source from below. Same thing here with Trilobites. Gotta love those Trilobites. And these are drawings that have been done in some of the classes I've done before with kids. And in 1-hour drawing session, that's what they did. I let them draw anything, and you can draw anything you want tonight, but I'm going to show you how to draw a particular thing tonight. And we're going to draw that particular thing being a giant spike-tooth salmon. And like I said, I used to call them saber-tooth, but it's really more like these big sideways spikes. And these blunt, actually in the fossil record, they were blunt. Probably in life, they were very sharp. And when I first did that drawing, I was hedging my bets because I heard 2 different things. The scientific papers said they pointed down, but yet some people knew about the sideways thing, so I didn't know what to believe at the time. So I did this drawing in 1992, I believe, a long time ago. So like I said, and as Ed referred to, it was, you know, people knew about that other specimen that showed the sideways, but it wasn't in a public collection. So that's the importance of getting things, important fossils into public collections. And that's chalk pastel on paper, but I really got into Neocolor after that. Same effect. This is the governor of Alaska, Jay Hammond, who came by my studio in 1992 when I was drawing this, and he was shooting the TV show, and there's Jay Hammond, and I was drawing it live for him. And in the early 90s, I went to the Museum of Natural and Cultural History in Eugene, and William Orr allowed me to take that very delicate type specimen out. But notice that there is no actual tooth on it. I actually did a little cutout tooth and taped it onto the holotype. But that's how big that one species, that one creature was, that one particular individual. I'm 5'10", so you can see that's a very big salmon. Estimates are that they got at least reach up to 8 feet and maybe even more. And with that, I'm going to quit my keynote, and did I stop sharing? I think I have stopped sharing.
You have.
Thank you. Shall we move on to drawing then?
Let's do that. I'm excited.
Lauren, shall we?
Of course.
I think that's the go ahead. So here we are in my little home in Ketchikan, and you are in my living room and dining room, actually sort of one and the same. And I've already kind of sketched out very lightly here, but this is the big piece of black paper. And the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to take a white pencil, and you could use a Prismacolor pencil if you like, or if you've got the white crayons, you can use a lighter crayon. But basically, we're going to start with an outline. But one of the things I want to show you is that, I mean, this is a 3D printout of just the snout of the salmon. And check out those spikes. And this is like a 3D print from that one that was in a private collection for many years. And Greg Carr from the NARG group sent this to me. But if you draw this fish sideways, you know, just looks like a little bump there. I want to show off those spikes. So we're going to sort of skew this a little bit so that we can have sort of a dynamic pose. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to be using Neocolor crayons. And there are 2 types of Neocolor crayons. There's Neocolor 1 and there's Neocolor 2. And Ed, you're still on my screen. Do you need to be on my screen, or am I? Oh, it's all right. I can still watch you, man.
I can make Edward go away momentarily.
Not that I don't like looking at Ed, but now I got you there, and I'll do a full gallery, full screen. So these are the difference is Neocolor 1 are water fast. They're sort of oil based. They are not gonna, if you use water, they're not water soluble. These are oil. These are very stable. I like to use these for detail stuff, and you can do interesting things with the Neocolor 1 and the Neocolor 2. But the Neocolor 2 is water soluble. They're actually a little softer. Now, what's the difference between using this crayon and a regular like Crayola crayon is that these are heavily pigmented. And a Crayola crayon has got a lot of wax in it and just not very much pigment. So I'm going to move the old, and I want you to be able to see this. I'm going to make this outline a little bit stronger here. I'm starting with a circle over here. That's the eyeball. And the big shape of the fish. I want you to use the whole piece of paper. I'm doing this vertically too, by the way. And in hindsight, maybe horizontal would have been easier, but I wanted to show you the dynamic twist of the fish. So I'm going to kind of do this so that you can see it. And this is in the genus Oncorhynchus, which means it is a Pacific salmon. And here, that's what's been nice to be able to use this.
Ray, I'm going to interrupt you for 1 minute and just let people know who have joined us. In your view settings, so that you can see both of Ray's screens right now, you should go into your view settings and select gallery if you happen to have speaker as your default settings. So you want the gallery view in your settings. Back to you, Ray.
Thank you, Lauren. Can everybody see? Can you see both screens there, Lauren? Okay. Can you see that? I think that's showing up pretty well there. Looks
Yes,
like
it
on
is.
camera 2. So notice, I've got the spikes kind of flaring out. But what is so crazy about that snout is that there are these big sort of, it's almost like a couple of golf balls right there at the tip of the snout with these spikes coming out of them. So it's just like, yeah, they are side by side. That's underneath. This is a top view. So there's no other fish that's got anything like that, even though there are no other salmon that have reinforced bone like that.
We think we have a hypothesis for what's going on there, Ray.
Yeah, we do, Ed. You want to talk about that?
Well, there's two things. There's the hypothesis for how it grows the thing, and then there's some hypotheses for what it does with the teeth. So the big golf ball shaped things are because we think it's moving the teeth to that outside direction by growing lots of extra bone on the bottom side. So they start out in the normal tooth position, and then it just grows a ton of bone on the inside and not on the outside, and that forces them around to the sides and gives them that kind of golf ball shape in the middle. So that's lots of extra bone it's producing to push the teeth sideways. Then hypotheses about what it's doing with the teeth. I think Jerry Smith has the best one so far when he points out that salmon have really strong muscles for side-to-side motion, even the modern salmon do. And so with these teeth pointing sideways, it can actually bring not only its mass, but the full force of all its muscles to bear on slamming those teeth sideways into other animals. We know that they didn't have the teeth when they were in the ocean, and they grew them as they came inland. There's a colleague of mine, Julia Sankey, who's down at Cal State Stanislaus, who's been able to show that with her research. So just like the modern sockeye salmon, they develop this kype as they go in to spawn. We think that the giant spike-toothed salmon was growing these teeth on its way inland to spawn. So essentially, and we think both males and females would have had them. So it's using these teeth like a basketball player uses her elbows to get space. It's using these teeth so that the females can fight for space to lay their eggs in the right spot in the stream, and then the males can fight to get access to the females that are getting those best spots to spawn. So there's a lot of like intra-species competition that supports having these teeth. We don't think they were using them for preying upon other animals. We don't think they were using them when they were in the ocean. They were using them during the spawning process.
Yeah, there's been, basically this is a big plankton feeding fish, but it's got these massive spikes, and we're talking about a 400-pound fish in that range using, and in life, as Ed was saying, we're using them side to side, but so and those are probably much sharper in life. You wouldn't want to mess with this fish, even though it's the sister species of the sockeye. It would be worth trying to get it in your boat, because I'm sure they're mighty, mighty tasty, but there we go. Can you see that? So
yes, and we just changed the settings to spotlight that particular camera. So hopefully people who were having a hard time seeing before can see that a little bit better now on their screens.
okay, so that's my drawing. This is a vertical piece of paper. You guys have some Canson paper. If you've got what we suggested in the list, that's about 15 by 28, I believe. This is a 22 by 30 inch, a little bit bigger piece of paper, but you can see the proportions. And so what I've got, just to point this out, there's the old eyeball. And I want you, like I said, draw large. And here's the sideways teeth. And then you've got your gill plates, your operculum, all these gill rakers down here. And then the pectoral fin, there's going to be one of those on either side, but we can't see the other one. So there's one pectoral fin right there. This is the lateral line of the fish going down. And here's the dorsal fin up here. And then there are two pelvic fins. So the fish is twisting. So I've got those two pelvic fins right there. Think of those as, this is like the arm of the fish right here, the arms. And these are the legs, the pelvic fins. Okay, so there's 2 and 2. Can't see the other pectoral fin, but there's the two pelvic fins. This is the anal fin, which is coming down right like that. and then the caudal fin, which is the tail, and this is the adipose right there, little kind of fatty thing that all salmon have right before their tail. So we've got that drawn in, I hope, right? Okay, so what I'm going to do is basically, I'm going to do one other thing here too. I'm going to give myself sort of some parameters for where the color is going to go. And kind of doing a sort of random line here. But pretty much most fish in the ocean are counter shaded, which means their bellies, at least when they're in the ocean, are lighter and their backs are darker. So I'm going to color this more or less like a sockeye salmon, since they are the species, the sister species of a sockeye. And then, so I've just got kind of a white line going there. So basically, what I'm going to do is I'm going to color this area red, just fill it in red. I'm going to fill in the head green. I'm going to do the dorsal fin in green. I'm going to do the tail in green. And this, we see the lateral line moves around, so the lateral line is now over here. And I'm going to do the fins in gray. But the thing about drawing with these Neocolor crayons is I did a couple little demo drawings of a sphere here, and light coming down from the upper left to the lower right. And here, with this fancy little descriptions, we have the highlight, the midtone, and the core shadow. There's the cast shadow, and then notice this, the reflected light, and this is what I have fun with. If you've got like a bluish surface, it's gonna, that reflected light bouncing up off the surface is going to take up the color below it. So I'm going to think of a light source coming down this way and a light source kind of shimmering this way. But one of the first things I like to do is give my little fish some character. And I think one of the first things I'm going to do is going to grab a yellow crayon and I'm going to color in that eyeball. I remember once somebody telling me that if most freshwater fish are usually looking down, so usually kind of put that pupil toward the bottom, it looks, and I put a little white highlight there. And now that I've got that white crayon in my hand, I'm going to color those spikes. And I'm just going to fill it in, but the thing about using the crayon, and especially this paper, it's got a nice texture to it. And actually, if you're using the Canson paper, there's one side that's got a little bit more texture and the other side is a little bit smoother. I really prefer the textured side. What's interesting about the spike-tooth salmon is basically in the upper jaw, it's basically got those two spikes and no other teeth. And in the lower jaw, it's got a couple teeth down at the end. So I'm just kind of filling those in. But what I want you to do, I'm gonna color in this area here in the red, the sockeye color. But what you're gonna do, and I'm just gonna grab an average red. And what I've done, you could get crayon dash Neocolor crayons in bigger sets, smaller sets. I don't know how big your budget is, but as I color, I'm going to start just filling in the red area on the fish, and notice that as you're filling it in, this is where it's different than drawing on white paper. On white paper, you are drawing the shadows. On black paper, you're drawing the light. Okay, so the more pressure you use, the lighter it is. Okay, if you start to use it, so I'm grabbing sort of lighter colors. If I'm drawing with a black crayon on a piece of black paper, obviously it's just the paper is actually sort of not a true black. It's actually a deep gray. But the harder I pressed with this crayon, it's a middle tone crayon, all right? So it's a middle red, middle range. The harder I press, the lighter it is. And I'm thinking about light coming down from this direction here. And usually what I like to do too is, if I want, I can have an imaginary light source, but sometimes literally I will just draw the moon up there, and helps out. Gives me an idea of, you know, the moon is up there. It's a moonlit night. So there, as I draw, I'm using more pressure up there. And you can see it's lighter up there. And I'm going to draw that lateral line. I'm actually going to literally draw that in. I'm going to go right down, because on a salmon, you'll notice that's usually kind of looks like a large vein running down its side. And the lateral line helps the fish feel vibrations in the water. So if you have a limited number of crayons, you can actually blend them. You can have color go over color. And I'm filling this in as quickly as I can. But what really helps when you're drawing a shape too, if you are kind of following the contour shapes, or you think of it almost as a sculpture. So if you're kind of drawing in a direction, the strokes that you're leaving, if you want to be sketchy, you can be a little bit more sketchy, a little bit more Van Gogh-like, leave those sketch marks there. You can get, you know, a sense of light going in over it. And I'm going to fill in the red down here. And essentially, you block out the areas with that contour light drawing using a light pencil, and then basically you're filling in the colors. It's as simple as that, but then it really is all the variations that you do within that. So now, kind of get the red areas blocked in, and I'm going to grab, Sockeyes got a green head. I'm going to grab my green crayon. Green crayon. And like I said, I should have. Can you see? I'm in the way there. I usually like to have music playing while I'm drawing, just to soothe the old brain, but also just to get in that other space, get the flow going. So blocking in the green head pretty quickly here. The salmon have a big sort of lip flap there. We're coming up to those big, strange, bony nodules that hold those massive spikes. In that area between the red and the green, you just kind of overlap that a little bit. It's kind of interesting to see that green disappear into the red. And this is, once again, kind of a middle tone green. And I'm going to block in the dorsal fin. Lauren, you got a question out there at all?
Yes, we do.
I could take this question while I'm filling in stuff. I'm going to grab a gray. I've got a nice gray. I'm going to use the gray in the fins, and then I'll block in the belly. But what's the question?
We have one person who is intrigued by the art on the wall behind you and is wondering if you can tell us about it a little bit.
That is a painting by my friend, Josephine Hockenhull, known as Joe Hockenhull. But Joe was my professor at Washington State University. I love ducks, but I'm a cougar, sorry to say, but I went to Wazoo, got my Master of Fine Arts there. But Joe lives in Salem, Oregon with her husband, Jim. I was in a band with them. So when I was in grad school, first thing you should do is get into a band with your professors. So that's what I did. And we called ourselves Zuzu. We were big in Spokane, and actually played in San Francisco once upon a time. But I asked Josephine to do me a painting a few years back. I basically commissioned her to do that. So it's a big acrylic painting by Joe. And we just got it this last year. And it's beautiful, and it's on canvas. It's acrylic on canvas.
We do have a question that came in for Edward, and it's already been answered in the chat, but just in case some people haven't opened the chat and haven't seen it. Edward, do you want to answer for the full group when the saber-tooth salmon existed and how many extinct salmonids there are?
Certainly, yeah. So the spike-tooth salmon, and I'm still getting used to not calling it the saber-tooth salmon.
I'm same here, Ed.
But the spike-tooth salmon lived about 5 million years ago at the end of the Miocene. And we've got some samples we're going to run radiometric dates on to try to get a tighter constraint. But all of the sites we've found are from that time period, right when the Earth was starting to cool off towards the ice house that we have now. And I don't know how many extinct salmonids there are. That would be a better answered question by some of my colleagues who study these guys for their full-time work. But I know of at least 2 other fossil salmonids that are related to the spike-tooth salmon. And the coolest one is this one that Jerry Smith has published and from Idaho, that's Kokanee. So if you're familiar with modern salmon, Kokanee are forms that don't go back to the ocean. They're not anadromous. They live inland and they stay in the inland waters. So apparently one of the populations of the giant spike-tooth salmon got trapped or chose to stay inland in Idaho back in the Miocene. And because the lake they were in was small, they evolved to small body size. So what you actually got is a fossil miniature giant salmon. It's kind of like the dwarf mammoths that they find on islands all over the world, where the mammoths evolved smaller body size so they could have a bigger population on these little islands. Only it's the reverse because it's in the middle of the continent, but you've got this lake. So a dwarf mammoth is one of my favorite oxymorons, and I guess a miniature giant salmon would be in the same kind of category.
Oh yeah, a miniature giant salmon is great. Yeah, I've read some of Jerry's papers, and I know that there's a great deal of diversity in the salmonids in the Miocene, and some different species. He's published them. They're pretty obscure. They pretty much look like modern day salmon, but
that's an important point, Ray. A lot of times we give a lot of press to the things that are different from today, like giant salmon, giant ground sloths, giraffe camels, but all the things that are around today, many of them have things that were doing the same job. We've got fossil squirrels in our museum from 20 million years ago that look just like squirrels today. I mean, the details are different. They're clearly different species, but they're doing the same job. So if you'd gone to Oregon 20 million years ago, you would have found ground squirrels doing the ground squirrel thing. And you would have found salmon in the ocean that were normal sized salmon doing the normal salmon thing back in the Miocene.
yeah, it's pretty easy to get fascinated by the big giant things. But you know, I worked with So what's cool about the Oncorhynchus rastrosus, aka the spike-tooth salmon from long ago, is it ranged throughout the North Pacific. I guess there have not been any fossils found in Asia yet, but they've been found up and down the West Coast. And I have looked at vertebrae of some of these from like the Los Angeles area that are easily the size of marlin, and which is pretty astounding to think of a fish that big. So what I'm doing right now is just that counter shading. I have sort of a very light blue that I'm using. It's not a white, but you could use a white. That's what you got. So I've kind of blocked in the fish at this point. It's blocked in. But here's what I want to show you too, is that so I've got the light coming down from above, and I've only just used, I've used only a green crayon, a red crayon, and a gray crayon, and a light blue, which is, I'm going to go over that with some white. But I just want to show you what happens when I do this reflected light thing, when I think about a blue light source, and this is sort of theatrics, but a blue light source coming up from this direction, kind of bouncing off the reflected light. And I'm going to take a kind of aqua blue. There's the aqua blue, sort of a turquoise. And there's the fish so far. He's looking kind of frisky. And everywhere that's closer to that light source, I'm going to take this right along the snout. And I'm thinking about light, like I said, coming from down below. And I'm just going to have it hit along the edges. So what you're doing is you're letting the black of the paper act as your shadow. So when you let off on the pressure, you are letting that black paper through, right? So that is acting as the shadow. So the stronger I said, that I'm drawing, the harder I draw. The harder I draw, sounds like a reggae song. The harder I draw, the lighter it is. But here's that little blue line that's kind of coming up from below. Light coming this way, it's just going to catch along the edges.
Ray, someone's asking if the neo colors need to be sealed with a fixative.
That's a good question. I usually don't do that. I can rub this, pastels need to be fixed like that because they're basically, you're drawing with dust. These are, oily-ish, like I said, the crayons themselves are very goopy, but they don't need to be fixed. I was going to say, one of the things I've done too is I like to draw standing up sometimes. So actually, I'm going to show you a finished drawing of this same composition here in a minute. But I frequently use some Easy Tack spray glue, and I have a kind of funky sheetrock wall that I just lightly spray glue the back of these, and I just stick them to the wall. Now I want to show you a couple other things I use too. These crayons will break on you, and they're not cheap, but I've tracked down, there's some special, these are made by Karan Ash. They are the pencil, the crayon extenders. So what's nice is with these little broken bits, I can take this fancy crayon extender and take a little broken bit, push down the thumb there, and insert the crayon there. Get a lot more miles out of it. I do the same thing with my colored pencils, where I've got pencil extender. So as an artist, you accumulate hundreds of broken crayons, and you don't want to always be using a new pencil. You get that down to those little nubs. These pencil extenders are great. And then, so here, let me show you too what's going on with this little addition of just kind of a reflected light coming up. So I'm going to go in a little bit now with a lighter green. So if you got these different colors, you can begin to kind of sculpt and get that light a little bit more dynamic, because you've only got so much range with one color. If you come in with a lighter version of a color, a lighter crayon, and in the more expensive sets, you can experiment with, I usually don't wet these, but with the Neocolor 2 crayons, they are a little bit softer. They'll give you a little bit more of a brighter color. You can experiment. When I'm drawing on the black paper, you can add water to them if you want. I usually don't, just because I like that sort of real graphic look. But how are we doing on time, Lauren?
We're doing all right. We've had a couple more questions coming in.
Okay.
One of them's for Edward, wondering if there were any known predators of the spiked tooth salmon.
That's a great question. We don't have any direct evidence yet. There are a number of animals that could have been predators in the ocean. There are a number of big carnivorous sharks and whales that were around at the time that could have easily been eating these guys. When we look inland, there were actually some much larger carnivores that would have been living on land. So, if you see the pictures of the Kodiak bears knocking the salmon out of the water, at the time that the spike-tooth salmon was alive in the late Miocene, there would have been these animals called bear dogs alive in North America.
I love that.
As much bigger than Kodiak bears as like your spike-tooth salmon is bigger than the salmon that the bears are eating today. So I love this idea of a bear dog standing in a stream, swatting a spike-tooth salmon out to go eat it. But we don't have any direct evidence of it. That would just be a hypothesis.
I like that. Would there have been, in the Miocene, we would have had saber-toothed cats too, right?
That's true. You would have had saber-toothed cats, not the Smilodon horridus.
Right,
but there were other ones that were around, and some of them bigger. Yeah.
So, my first drawing is, if you're going to draw a saber-toothed salmon, you got to have a saber-toothed cat going after it. And the idea that there being a duel. So I thought maybe these guys were more in the Pliocene, but the latest analysis puts them in the Miocene.
They're right at that Miocene-Pliocene transition, as far as I can tell. Like I said, I don't have any good dates on them. So they probably did stretch into the Pliocene, but the site that we're getting them in Oregon, just because of the lava flows, it's sandwiched between, looks like it probably is like right at the end of the Miocene.
Huh.
Yeah.
But
That's a hypothesis, right? So subject to confirmation.
These would have been contemporaries of Megalodon, wouldn't they?
Oh yeah, yeah, they would have.
You have Megalodon eating them.
Yeah, I guess we do get some Megalodon on the West Coast. Rare, but not impossible. I think we got one.
Oh, sorry, Edward, go ahead.
I was going to say we've got one Megalodon tooth out of the Astoria Formation. So.
Yeah, they were around, for sure.
Yeah.
Ray, someone is asking whether other colored pencils can be used along with the Prismas on the black paper.
Yeah, there's various variety. There's different varieties of color pencils. I've just found that they're just sort of the right amount of oiliness and pigment in the Prismacolors that just really pop well. But actually, that's a good point too, that I then come back in to tighten things up, I just put a little orange highlight kind of going over the red here. And now I'm going to pop in a few highlights, make things some real strong whites. But I think maybe at this point, that's the rough sketch in. All right, I can spend a little bit more time on this, but I want to show you the finished drawing now. See, just like Martha Stewart, I've got a finished one in the oven. My lovely assistant, my beautiful wife, Michelle, is going to hand this to me. And I started and finished. No, actually, if you'll take it off of that.
Oh.
Yeah. I started and finished this drawing yesterday. And so it's the same composition, same fish. Thank you. And so what I did here, and I called it Moonlit Spike-Tooth Salmon. So I put a moon up there. I did a little border because I like to do these little funky borders and little doodads out there. And it's sort of an oriental kind of, so this is where I'm, you know, I'm not your traditional paleo artist by any means. I try to get the creatures right and get the science and get deep into the science. But I'm trained as a fine artist, and that's kind of what I do. But notice that I did come back in with a black Neocolor crayon to kind of tiger stripe it, so I can actually take a little of the black back in. I use a black Prismacolor pencil to tighten up edges. So like I said, you leave the black to let it be your shadow, but you can start injecting some colors into those areas. But then also when I want to tighten up, I can come back in and clean up edges with a black colored pencil. But also I have the scale pattern on these. These guys did have, actually some of the fossils I've seen in LA of Oncorhynchus rastrosus, there's big, they actually had some pretty large scales preserved in some of the specimens I saw. But what I basically did is a grid kind of going down lines with a black pencil, and then another coming back in, giving a diamond shape. So a grid of lines going this way. If you look at a modern day salmon, it's doing that same kind of thing. And I have them down there just in the red area. It's a little complex to really figure out how they wrap around in the belly like this. But this is the sort of, and also I cleaned up the gills, and then I did this pattern back here. I had a lot of fun doing that. And also you can see these came back in with a white crayon up here and really hit that. These little highlights that kind of shimmer through, you know, even on the water, but also, you know, on the creature itself. And so that, and this is, I drew this, like I said, vertically because it was just easier. I got a little spray glue in the back. But then also, I want to show you another drawing because I've been thinking about the Spike-Tooth Salmon. And I think that's a nice name. It's a common name. Thank you. No, leave that there. Thank you. So that's the thing with common names. The scientific name is Oncorhynchus rastrosus. I love Ed's description of the parentheses of shame. So it's Oncorhynchus smilodonyctes rastrosus. And but then whatever common name, you know, begins to be used, I just like the idea of the big spike-tooth salmon. So here it is, Oncorhynchus rastrosus, the spike-tooth salmon. And it's a big salmon, so I like the giant spike-tooth salmon. But here's that side view, and this is also a case where I covered it in wax paper, put a little spray glue in that wax paper, and then I used an X-Acto knife to cut it out, and I exposed these areas, let this covered, this was exposed, and then I used spray paint, actually just enamel spray paint, took it outdoors and gave it this real soft kind of, and I took a little bit of time. This is got a lot of color subtleties in it. There's some yellow ochre in here. There's some in the eyeball, and then some nice little details with color pencil. And I think with that, we're down to the old Q&A time, right?
Yes,
Lauren?
we are. And a few more have come in. Ray, someone is wondering if you're going to be at the aquarium at all during the exhibit.
I'm going to be at the aquarium actually next week, installing the exhibit, but it's not open to the public yet. But no events are planned. It's going to open on January 11th. And like I said, as Ed mentioned, there's some beautiful
June, July.
June, I said January. I'm sorry. Oops, brain. Oh, I'm an old man. June 11th, not January. It's going to be up for a year. So it's up through to the beginning of next summer. And it features a lot of really spectacular fossils on loan from your wonderful museum and your great collection there. And including that one skull. Actually, you'll have the beautiful skull of a spike-tooth salmon that you see. And we're going to paint a big life-size one on the wall.
Nice. Someone is wondering if you could quickly revisit the difference between Neocolor 1 and Neocolor 2, and to clarify which one you were using this evening. I think the supply recommendation we sent out was Neocolor 2, but this person thinks maybe you were using Neocolor 1 tonight.
That's a very good question. You know, in the end, since I'm not really using water with these, Caran d'Ache makes more colors in the water soluble version. So, and I find that there's slightly, well, the short answer is I was using both. And actually, I'm not really even paying attention to it. I really pay attention when I want the difference between the Neocolor 1 and 2. The Neocolor 1 is oily based. It is not water soluble. Okay, I can splash water on this and it's not going to smudge. And I can get more exact lines with it. And also in terms of keeping these things sharp too, that's a challenge. So you can use either an X-Acto knife, or I have an old manual. Can you grab that? Thank you, my wonderful assistant, off camera. Unless you want to say hi. You want to say hi? You want to see her?
Sure. Does Michelle want to be seen?
He's waving over there. But I think some people may not know what an old school, pencil sharpener with multiple sizes on it. So you can use that very delicately to sharpen these. But anyways, the Neocolor 2 is just goopier and you can get brighter colors with it. So I go back and forth with them. And once you start using them a lot, you'll appreciate the difference between the two. But I suggested the Neocolor 2 because you get more variety and they're just brighter. And you can also have fun with them. If you want to draw on a light paper with them and then take water to them, you can treat them just like watercolors. They're really wonderful tools. They're not cheap, but they're fun to draw with. I like to say they're grown-up crayons, or they are professional crayons.
So that kind of ties into a different question we had. Someone's wondering if you ever, oh wait, I thought they were asking about crayons in like a different kind of crayon, but now that I read the question, I think I might have been wrong. They are asking, do you ever use the crayons on smaller pieces along with the Prismacolors? But the Prismacolors are the crayons, correct?
No, Prismacolors are pencils.
Oh.
Prismacolors are pencils. The crayons are Neocolor. And yes, actually, when I draw with the color pencil on black paper, yeah, I can do much more detailed kind of stuff. But essentially, when you're drawing on a piece of black paper, it's going to be pretty dark, so you really want to just start. It's like when I want to really super white on top of a white, and the color pencil can only get me to kind of a almost pure white, but I can't get there. I'll grab the Neocolor crayon and hit it. And you can do the same thing. If I wanted a super bright white on top of this white right here, I would grab an oil pastel and go on top of it. And actually, sometimes I've even taken acrylic paint and gone over it. I mean, just have fun with mixed media. And that's like I said, I started goofing around with spray paint in the background, whatever works, whatever gets you there.
Can you show on the camera where you just held that one up, your finished drawing of the salmon from tonight for everyone to give them a little bit better view again?
Can you see it?
Yes.
And if I do it sideways, fill the
Some of the details. Could you talk a little bit more about how you create details with shading? That's one of the questions we're getting. Maybe like that checkered pattern for the scales of the fish.
Yeah, actually, so one of the things here, if I'm gonna hold that right in there, so the scales of the fish, I did all the color, the drawing I was doing tonight, but then I started mixing in I have different reds and things too. And there are different kinds of these crayons too. Cretacolor is another brand. I like them. They got some of the greens that, you know, Neocolor has not done. But I used the black pencil, went over that to give that shape. But then I came back in with little highlights. You can see little highlights. Took a white crayon and then like a pink crayon too to just hit little shimmering bits on the scales. And I actually did that same thing on this drawing. You can see that pattern, but then I came back in with little highlights on that. But really, so this is really a great deal of pressure with the white, but then I'm letting off and the paper is reading through here in the shadow area. But then also what I will do too is inject some color into that shadow area. So there's actually some lavender in this one. So you can go back in, and actually in here, in the deeper shadows, I took a deep purple. It doesn't show up in the camera, but you know, if you were to buy the original, or if I do a big print of this or something, you'd be able to see that. And actually, that's another thing too, is that these are originals, and then you can photograph these or scan these, generally photograph them. And then you can also kind of tweak things and bring up colors in Photoshop and make them pop even more, which I do a lot. Photoshop cures everything.
Speaking of your originals, we do have someone wondering what is going to happen with the two pieces that you've shown tonight, and whether they are for sale or not. But also, if you want to give a little plug to your online website / retail store, you can do that now.
Yeah, thank you. Well, Michelle is the gallery manager and owner is right over there, but we have an online store, trollart.com. I do put originals there from time to time, and I probably will put these. Usually I just put them in a drawer for a while till I figure out what to do with them. But yeah, I will put them in. But it seems like I'm assembling a little exhibit of Spike-Tooth Salmon originals. So maybe there's a mini Spike-Tooth thing that'll happen. But yeah, if you could go to trollart.com, there's a section there with originals. I have a lot of black and white pen and ink drawings there. And I also want to mention too, Lauren, that we have I'm doing a podcast nowadays called Paleo Nerds. And maybe we can get Ed on at some point. And we're 32 episodes in. We got 2 seasons so far. I'm doing it with a friend of mine by the name of David Strassman. And we have scientists and other artists on the show, and writers and creative types, but it's all about paleo, but we're far ranging. It's really good stuff, if I don't mind saying so. And you can hear that in all the podcast platforms and or iTunes, Spotify, and all that. And there's a website, paleonerds.com.
Perfect. So we're about to wrap up. I'm going to squeeze in 2 more questions. One should hopefully be quick, like looking at the wrong one now. Someone's wondering whether the drawing you did tonight was of a male or female salmon.
Well, as Ed says, both sexes had them, and the honest answer is, I don't know.
All right. No, that's a perfect.
I can jump in real quick.
Yeah.
So Karen Cleason thinks she can tell the difference, and the females have a more rounded snout end, and the males have a more pointed snout end. So
Snout is actually got a little point in the end of it.
yeah, so that it's not like super prominent, but just like the difference between something that's more like a real sort of half dome and something that's got more of a peak to it. Yeah.
A little bit more of a beak. So I kind of did a little beak in these guys. So
yeah,
maybe else.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to end with a final question, probably for Edward, but Ray, feel free to chime in. Someone is wondering what selective force factors or forces or factors may have led to the existence of a giant salmon species. And on a related note, are they more likely to be preserved as fossils than smaller species?
Those are both great questions. I actually have like an hour-long talk I do about why we think they evolved to be this big. But the nutshell answer is that when modern salmon lay eggs, bigger females don't lay bigger eggs, they lay more eggs. And so we think that these giant salmon, these giant spike-tooth salmon wouldn't have laid bigger eggs than modern salmon. They would have been the same size. So giant salmon caviar would look just like modern salmon caviar.
Really?
But can you imagine how many more eggs a giant salmon female could lay than a modern salmon female? So there's a strong evolutionary pressure for increased body size, but there's a limit today in the oceans that's made by the temperature of the ocean and how much productivity, how much energy there is in terms of things you can eat. And so the end of the Miocene was very warm compared to today. So we think there would have been a lot more plankton living in the ocean. So more space for filter feeding animals to evolve and use those resources. So the idea also, there was a lot more water because of the warmer ocean brought more water inland. So the streams and rivers of the Western US would have been a lot deeper. And one of the things that constrains salmon body size is those females have to make it all the way up to the spawning pools. So with the deeper streams and rivers and more productivity, you have an opportunity for salmon to get really big. And that all went away with the cooling of the earth after about 5 million years ago. As far as whether you're more likely to get big animals or small animals, there's a trade-off. The bigger you are, the fewer of them you can have in an environment, just because they all use resources, right? And so if you think about how many elephants there are in Africa as opposed to how many mice there are in Africa, that gives you an idea. There are a lot more mice. And so that trade-off ends up working out. We have a lot of fossils of smaller salmon. It's just not super exciting, so we don't go give talks about them. And then we have a very small number of fossils of the really big salmon, but they're easier to find. And so in the end, I think that's a trade-off. We knew that there was a giant salmon for 100 years. Scientists had talked about the giant salmon, but they only had vertebrae, backbone pieces. So they knew how big it was, but you can't name a species from a single backbone piece. They needed a skull that was really showed the characteristics of the animal. And that's why it didn't get named until 1972. So in the end, they're, I think, less likely to get preserved just because there are fewer of them around, because they're so big, you can't have as many of them in any kind of ecosystem. So thanks for those great questions.
Yeah, that was great. That was a great answer to it. I had, a lot to think about there. Yeah, but the bigger you are, the more vulnerable you are sometimes, but just thinking about this massive plankton feeding salmon. When I first heard about a giant prehistoric salmon, back in the 80s, late 80s, I was like, somebody's making this up. And then, so now it's a giant spike-tooth salmon, but wonderful stuff. Lauren, I guess that's it. I think we had a lot of great questions, and I hope people have enjoyed drawing tonight. You can draw whatever you want, but Lauren, is there people going to share their drawings somehow?
Well, no, because we don't have ability for people to turn their cameras on, but you can, if you are on either Instagram or Facebook, you can take a photo of your drawing and then tag the museum, and that'll share it to the museum's Facebook page or the Instagram page. I might have said YouTube a minute ago. I meant Instagram if I said YouTube. We will also be posting a recording of this program to the museum's YouTube page. So if you weren't able to keep up with the drawing tonight, don't worry. We'll be sharing a recording with all of you, and you'll be able to slow it down a little bit and draw along if you so desire. Ray, I just want to throw in that we have had one person inquiring about when or if women's cut shirts might start to be available on your site. So I just want to throw that out there.
We do have some women's cuts. We do have some women's cut t-shirts.
All right. The demand is there.
All right, good enough.
So thank you so much, Ray, for your time tonight and joining us and sharing your skills and your drawings with us. Thank you, Edward, for coming and talking to all of us about the spike-tooth salmon and answering questions. Thank you to everyone out there watching. I hope you have a great evening, and we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Lauren.